Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 210th audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble Channel series. I'm the Q News Patriot, joined again today by Anon and former Amway businessman, Mr. Judah Ayers. My name is SG Anon. Patriots, I'm excited to welcome Judah back to the show for what I believe is going to be a well-timed conversation. For those unfamiliar, Judah's work over the last several years seems to have unmasked one of the major secret societal connections inside the U.S. political landscape, one that permeated not only government, but private business and philanthropy as well, with names and faces each of you will probably recognize. We're going to cover the web he's pieced together and some current progress and disclosures related to it in just a moment. But first, let's hear a quick word from today's sponsor, BF7 by Juvenon. Stay with us. Patriots, we could describe the post-COVID world in a lot of different ways, but on a personal note, the biggest differences for my family and I between pre-2020 and post-2020 really center around two main areas: the broad public awakening that we talk about often on this show, and the challenges to maintaining and improving personal health and vitality. I can't speak for all of you out there, but with respect to that inside our household, one of the biggest changes we've seen over the last 5 years has been a noticeable drop in vigor and energy levels. Going into COVID, for example, I was working as a full-time upper mid-level business manager between 45 and 65 hours a week, and it was nothing at all for me to come home after work every day, even on the long weeks, split the housework up, and be an involved and active dad. These days, I keep a schedule that's slightly less than 45 hours each week, with different and arguably less stress than a few years ago. And by the time I hit 9 p.m., it feels like I could fall asleep standing up. I blame that on a lot of different things, from disrupted hormones and American frankenfoods to the biologically altered reality of our world. But over the last 5 years, I've also learned that a major cause of depleted vitality is a deficiency of something called nitric oxide molecules, blood-borne molecules that help relax the body's blood vessels, veins, and arteries, ultimately resulting in better blood flow and circulation to areas of the body that often find themselves shortchanged once our main internal organ systems are provided for. Big Pharma will charge you anywhere from 9 to 20 times the standard market value for their nitric oxide boosting prescriptions, when effective supplements for blood and circulation support exist and are on the free market already. I've tried a couple of these myself over the last few years, but I recently got the chance to try Blood Flow 7, made by Juvenon. And I have to say, Patriots, I think it really works. BF7 is a triple action supplement with clinical studies behind it that show a 150 to 200% increase in nitric oxide production and a widening of vessel and arterial channels by over 50% from baseline. This translates to better flow and more oxygen and nutrition being delivered to both critical and non-critical bodily systems. I've been taking 2 capsules right after breakfast each morning, and I've noticed better stamina, better focus, and more vitality, even on the days where I skip my morning coffee. It's made with naturally derived ingredients, including the inactive fillers, and customer reviews found online suggest people are noticing real results with BF7 in just hours and days rather than weeks or months. Additionally, Juvenon offers a full 60-day empty bottle money-back guarantee on their product in the unlikely event that a customer out there isn't fully satisfied with their experience. You can try Blood Flow 7 by Juvenon for a little over $1 a day by navigating to www.bloodflow7.com/QNP or clicking the link below today's video. Once again, that is www.bloodflow7.com/QNP, or look for the link in the description box below. It worked for me, and I hope it works for you too. Thanks. And we're back. Judah, it's an honor to have you back to Q News Patriot for an exciting and expository discussion.
You bet, buddy.
So, it's been a little while since we've gotten together. For the audience out there, do you mind to give us a short recap? We know that you were connected to Amway. You've pieced together a pretty significant web that tied from Amway to what you believe to be the political scene, not only at a state level there in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is the home, if I remember correctly, of Amway's world headquarters, but also the political swamp in Washington, D.C. I'd love if you don't mind to just give us a once-over on that again before we get deeply into the discussion about current progress.
Yeah, you bet, SG. And obviously, as time goes on and we start to understand the intricacies of this operation, literally the history of, I was not really known to it, but after January the 6th, I was in DC with a group of about 20 or 30 of the best patriots in the world. Many of us were Amway business owners at the time until we woke up. But January 6th, Betsy DeVos, she decided to resign for the Trump administration. And when she cited that on CNN, by the way, that President Trump was a traitor and basically incited a riot, I was on the front steps myself, and I was a witness to what happened, along with the whole group of people that were with us. Preceding weeks, my cell phone started going off, and a lot of the people that are part of our group, their homes got raided. They got thrown in jails and prisons, and everybody knows the rest of the story from there. I then proceeded with my, 20, if not 40 years of relationship within the Amway business, contacted the president of the Amway IBO board, his name to be Joseph Markowitz. And as soon as I mentioned to him, hey, we need some legal help, he basically told me to shut my mouth and don't bring this topic up ever again. And if you do, there'll be consequences basically. Anyways, the snowball from that standpoint going forward, the preceding weeks, God basically had a revelation for me, and all the pictures, mindset, and captures of the questions that I had regarding things that just didn't make sense over the last, say, 20 years of my business, um, came to me those next 2 days in a vision. Couldn't sleep for the next week, and next thing you know, I started documenting everything that I had learned over those years and things that I had questions regarding really the GOP, the Republican Party. And as I started looking into there, I started understanding like, wow, this Gerald Ford group, there was a lot of questions because they were tied to the biomedical industry. They were tied to election Dominion, Smartmatic, Conakek, just a lot of things that I was like very interested in. And so, anyways, from that standpoint, now we started realizing that organization, the Gerald Ford Foundation specifically, I started to wonder why Henry Kissinger, Colin Powell, the Cheneys, the Bushes, they were all in line with the DeVosses and their money. And really, I started to realize that President Trump, his impeachment, after I started looking at the dollars and cents, the Q boards has explained follow the money. And I started going in it and I confirmed, really all the congressmen and senators that impeached Donald Trump, what did they all had in common? They had in common money given to them by what's called the RDV Group, a Richard DeVos Van Andel Fund, which is the Amway Corporation in terms of what they were doing. And as I started to notice this and bring this to the forefront, everything became clear about this secret society and these groups that were running this operation going on behind the scenes to take over our government and really install a new world order. Which in the past people would say, "Hey, that's a conspiracy theory. Oh, you're full of it." And well, the proofs are in the pudding. And as you come to look in terms of understanding all this, Q drop I tell people always look at is 4089. Sometimes you can't tell the public the truth, but you must show them. And it's time to wake up, Q. And when I saw that for the first time, it really made me start intriguing and looking into things even more importantly. And as you come to know, Betsy DeVos or Devo or whatever their family name in history really is, started popping up on the Q boards and really just started doing some homework and research. And as I got threats and I got my business terminated by not only the LOAs of LTD Leadership Team Development, the Amway Corporation, they did not want any of this information out. And so we proceeded into lawsuits and legal claims and a lot of things. And as you look into the judicial system that's run by really this group and the city of London, they went really quick into denying claims and throwing cases out. And Bush judges and everybody else from that standpoint wanted to hide these files and did not want anything to show up. So let alone we applied our constitutional duties and rights and moved it from the district court into the Fourth Circuit of Appeals Court, all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then went a couple rounds at the Supreme Court, only for them to, once again, what did they do? They decided to hide these cases, much like many of the cases from the J6ers. And so the proof is in the pudding. It's fascinating to see what's happening, but I'm just excited to be able to share this content and for the rest of the world to wake up to what is happening right now, because it looks like we are now in what's called disclosure. Obviously, last week, July the 14th, was another Q post that I look at it and it said a week to remember. And what do you know? Donald Trump on the 16th came out with disclosures. And what do you know? A lot of our quote unquote conspiracy theories have become proven fact. And so here we lay right now. And in that process, what do we do in terms of being able to help expose the United Nations, NATO, and these groups that are working behind the scenes to disrupt not only President Trump, but the American people?
Absolutely. It's an incredible operation and realization that everyone I think is experiencing and undergoing. And you've just summed up, your sort of little slice of life of that, if you will, I think very, very well. If I'm not mistaken, you have a presentation as well, or at least several slides that we can look at and share with the audience. If you don't mind to pull those up, that would be wonderful. But I just want to
Definitely.
verify something you said a moment ago and drive down on its impact. From what you were talking about with the connections between the RDV group and that fund and the impeachment proceedings of the first Trump presidency, if I'm not mistaken, what I heard there was direct financial involvement on behalf of the Amway Corporation with the individuals in charge of removing a sitting president of the United States. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. And not only do we have the validations and the proof, these are things that I wanted to submit for what's called disclosure in court. And they would not allow my Seventh Amendment right to be heard. And so when you look in those types of things, really it comes down to is what body is willing to look into these topics for the American people. And as we come to talk about those topics, we start to look at, a whole group of people that had taken money from this family or this business group. And I tell people all the time is, what is the business group? Where does the money come from? And a lot of people don't really know, but the original seed fund actually came from the Rockefeller family. Legend would be told that this stuff came from the DeVos family. And even interesting is as we look at time and we look at families, really lately, I have what people call conspiracy theories. Well, they've been proven right. There's things out there that I won't talk about because they haven't been verified. But even as of late, I started looking at the DeVos family. I want to know what the connections are between the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. And it's very interesting to look at these families when you look at their families and what they look like. And gosh, I mean, there's a very strong connection and maybe even a bloodline connection, but we'll put that in a conspiracy category. I like looking at facts. And as we look at these facts, this is a fascinating topic. This is actually a letter from Doug DeVos, really bringing in all of these people. And we look at these families, this is interesting. They gave over $80 million to Mike Pence. And you start looking at these families, this is a fascinating topic.
Remarkable.
Once you get into you hear President Trump on the 16th, he mentioned disclosure. He talked about fake ballots. He talked about election machines. He talked about a lot of stuff that just really we need voter ID to be able to kind of weed things out. But we got to get rid of the machine topic. But I just thought it was very interesting. The Penske family, they own a truck of fleet. Think about that. They own trucks all across America that can move stuff. If there's a private organization that's able to move stuff outside of a government organization, I think it's worth, criminal referrals to look into some of these topics or families in terms of the things that they do with their businesses, or even how the Amway Corporation can move stuff around the world to 71 other countries that literally, what a coincidence. Those 71 countries, their elections were also flipped. And so it's just a fascinating topic to think about, the background in terms of what these families have done. Obviously, Betsy DeVos or Betsy DeVoe, she was the Secretary of Education. But the interesting thing was that she also helped run George Bush's campaigns as an early person back in the day. And so I just look at a lot of these things. There's a lot of stuff that we could talk about and discuss. But I have over time put a lot of my information into a website, which is called wewillstand.info. There's a lot of data there. There's a lot of um, videos there. There's a lot of legal cases posted there. I just find it's very interesting. My case that went to the Supreme Court actually got a filing number, and it's actually 24-1007. I just find that a very interesting coincidence. But the reality is, these things I told is that the safest place in the world to be is to someone to be documenting information and putting that out there for not only your safety, but the point is that these groups, in terms of what they've been doing, is all across America, there have been people that have said, hey, you know what? I'm willing to stand. I'm willing to stand for what's right. And I'm willing to say, hey, what can we do to be able to go out there and show the world these people that have been behind the curtain? As we talked about this before, the Wizard of Oz, literally had the curtain pulled back and people were able to wake up to the groups that literally were cohorting behind the scenes as private entities to take over a government. And anyways, as we get into that, I tell people this is a fascinating topic. The gentleman that you see on the screen, Gerald Ford, his vice president, Gerald Ford was the only president never elected to actual presidency. Think about that. Was he ever elected by the American people? No, he was installed. As we get into that installation, you start to look at his vice president. The vice presidents have always had huge things going on behind the scenes. And as you look at the vice presidents, why are they selected and why are they placed there? They can do a lot of work that the president can't do because the president's in the public eye all the time. Well, Nelson Rockefeller, a Rockefeller, was funded by the DeVos family years ago to put into place. And George Bush and Gerald Ford, I think it's a fascinating topic because people don't really know, but the Warren Commission was actually run by Gerald Ford. And what did they do? They actually hid the Kennedy assassination. And that's a whole nother topic in itself. But anyways, yeah, it's a fascinating topic to see kind of what's been happening with this group. And then, Gerald Ford, as we get into this, very interesting topic, the medical industrial complex, late 70s, mid 74, 75, 76, was really the last time we had a huge pandemic in the United States. 1975, we had the swine flu. A lot of that, if you go back, Gerald Ford was actually the person that was in charge when that coincidentally got put into display. And as we know, they launched the vaccine topics. The following year, they ushered in Carter in terms of relationship. Jimmy Carter, actually, by the mighty pen, installed what was called the Senior Executive Service. And as we get into that, I tell people all the time, what is the Senior Executive Service? It's something that the whole American population doesn't know about yet, and they deserve to know. And as they start to understand this group, this Gerald Ford group, people will go, well, who are they? What are they? This secret panel of people, was trying to run your life. As you get into that, you start to look at Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was actually one of the gentlemen helping run Senior Executive Service. This is an entire group, entire fund of our tax dollars going to a place that people did not know about. And then Henry Kissinger running some of his evil plans. But one of the things I found out is that is I went to the Amway Corporation for our leaderships. I always wanted to know, why was Henry Kissinger on the wall at Gerald Ford? There was basically a shrine to him. And once you get into understanding, the whole aspects of Henry Kissinger and their background, I started to realize that this group was one of the groups that really helped establish what's called COVICon. 2020 election was disrupted by what they call COVID. And that whole process nowadays, it's fascinating to understand what they did to be able to overthrow an election. And that whole group, as we start to look into these people, they really, the kind of the topic of the discussion right now is uh, is Dominion voting systems, Conakek, and Smartmatic, LHS, which most people don't talk too much about because Chris Sununu and Betsy DeVos They have a huge history in there with the Bush family. And so that goes all the way into, the facts of Venezuela and some of the topics that are happening right now.
Absolutely incredible. And again, could not be more appropriately timed given the disclosures that we saw from President Trump last week. I kind of want to take the conversation in that direction if we can. We know that the disclosures from last week on the 16th of July, 2026, concerning foreign interference and penetration in the 2020 election centered mostly on China. There was some mention of non-state actors, but it was mostly on the Chinese influence operations and the domestic co-op that occurred in order to allow that. Where does your information fit in with respect to China, and how is Amway connected to China in the broader entrepreneurial sense?
Wow, that's a really great question. Well, if you go into the details of that, um, this gets into a group. It's pretty fascinating. There's what's called, in the United States, a business consortium that puts stuff together, and that's the federal aspect. This group that was running these things for the Federal Trade Commission was a gentleman by the name of Steve Van Andel. Steve Van Andel is another owner of the Amway Corporation, but the Federal Trade Commission, in terms of what they're doing, he was the gentleman that went with George Bush actually to open up the Chinese market. George Bush was actually the ambassador to China, which people don't really remember or know about. But alongside of them, this group, and I'll throw it into um, the secret societies groups in terms of what they're doing. The Freemason groups had a plan, whether people understand it or not, out of London to have China basically take things over. And they were skating really fast to the Chinese currency. Amway, what people don't understand is just a couple of years ago, uh, all the Amway IBOs had to move into what was called the Chinese PayPal, and they transferred all their funds over to China a couple of years back. And today's actually Amway business owners are actually paid out of China first, which is fascinating. But as you get into these topics, Betsy DeVos was really RDV again. The DeVos family were the major funders and contributors to Mitch McConnell. And so, for how many years was that group funding um, Mitch McConnell, these congressmen, to really push their ability to control elections around the world? But we're going back to the China aspect. From China's perspective, the money today, Amway North America is not that big today, but a lot of that money is coming out of not only London, Ukraine, Amway Ukraine, Amway Venezuela, and today start looking at Amway China. This money was coming back out of these pockets and then going back into congressmen and senators' hands. And what's interesting too is if you actually follow it, even my upline, I questioned him a while back. I'm like, why are you taking money from your Amway check and funding Tom Tillis? Why are you funding Lindsey Graham? Why are you funding, oh my God, Joe Biden and Barack Obama? When you start to go into this and you look at the Amway money going back to the Obama administration and the Clinton Foundation, you have a strong eye openers because these were supposed to be people of integrity that were supposed to be in terms of, for the American people. And you start to realize that this group, these people were actually funding um, communism through a rhino perspective. And that's a hard pill for people to swallow because we've been dealing with mind control for years for these people to be able to go back and forth. And as we come to understand this, this is the group that literally, when they were starting to understand this, these groups were cohorting and working together throughout Haiti, throughout Venezuela, and around the globe. Again, like we talked about, they had to have a secret operation to be able to flip 71 other countries. And what's interesting is the connections through this, they're not only there, but we can't even use, typical law to be able to handle this stuff. This stuff has to go through what I think is a military court to be able to bypass the London bar, corrupt judges in terms of the DOJ. that President Trump right now, I think, is putting on full display to expose for the American people. I mean, it's a thinking exercise, as you know, SG, for people to be able to think through this because really our entire lives, they've kind of been manipulated. We've been under a spell per se to be able to look at what is on our news and on our media. And as General Flynn says all the time, is that the media has done us a disservice. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
It's really incredible when you look at the broad connectivity over a period of many years with Amway to regions that presently are under significant strife or have been under significant strife or pressure, and some of that going back as early as the first Trump presidency. You mentioned Venezuela just a moment ago. I think a lot of people out there will sort of begin to understand or are beginning to understand by now that Venezuela is intrinsically important to the United States geostrategically with respect to this exportation of election interference and potential coordination and planning of election interference. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Amway had an operation in Venezuela that closed down either immediately prior to or immediately after the Maduro raid that occurred in January of this year, which a lot of patriots out there suspect to be connected to that broader election interference problem. Is that true? And if so, what might be the motivations for Amway to be jumping ship right alongside that timing?
Yeah, I think that's fascinating timing. And as we come to understand this stuff, Venezuela was actually home to the Dominion and Smartmatic systems, and which is interesting. But um, I find it very interesting the day Maduro was, say, captured. Isn't it interesting? Just the couple days prior and during, Venezuela pretty much kicked Amway out of Venezuela. And so Amway sent out a message to all their independent business owners stating, because that was kind of the key of the topic, as I was being groomed per se to own a large business worldwide, started having business in South America. This was interesting. We went to the Fraud Fighter Summit just a few weeks ago, which was absolutely incredible. I know there's another one coming up here in October. Um, and what's interesting though is in there, um, the Brazilian president and his son were there in terms of what they're doing, and that this extension of around the globe, what's happening with these voting systems. Why did they want to have their president protected, who's exposing things? Bolsonaro is pretty much Trump 2.0. And now what's interesting is their kids are being persecuted for standing up against these globalista. But again, Amway's in Brazil. I registered a business in Brazil a long time ago, and I was wondering why. They also registered my business in Australia. We're beginning to register in Russia. Um, I look at that from my perspective, like, oh, wow, my upline had his best interest in mind to help me. No, they were actually looking for people to diversify their income. So as your income grew, they could put their thumb on you even more. And my upline, Joe, said, it's interesting how President Trump gives names to certain people, but I call him Marcofoni, just because, he's got business. Most of his business, people don't realize he's got a large China business. Well, obviously, he's got a stake in terms of protecting his income over protecting his country or being honest with the American people, which is really his downline here in the United States. But he put money before people. And so Venezuela, you just start to look at that. They got kicked out of Venezuela, pulled all their business, and no longer are they doing business in Venezuela. Very similar. People paint Putin as this bad guy, but isn't it interesting that overnight, Vladimir Putin kicked Amway out of Russia, and Amway lost $2.2 billion overnight? It's just a fascinating topic you look at. And so, again, you start looking around the world. Why does Amway have a lot of business transactions happening through the Ukraine? And so, we're starting to find this vast global network that people in their own countries are starting to stand up now. And this comes back to this topic. 71 other countries had their elections stolen. Make that 72 being the United States. It's very interesting to think, why is Amway in all those same countries? It's not about business, my friends.
Indeed, it is. And I was just about to ask if you don't mind to walk us through this slide that we have on the screen, because I think this slide actually speaks to a deeper truth that isn't readily visibly apparent. You've got this map of the planet underneath the caption, the world leader in secure election technology, LHS Associates and Smartmatic, but it looks distributed all over the major areas, what we would call the former Commonwealth realms and post-colonial realms, which were extensions for a long time of the empire of the Luciferian occult system. And I find that very, very fascinating when we look at that connection to the ability and the reality that we've now unearthed with respect to the committance of fraud, the ability to commit fraud, and how easy it is to switch elections, especially in this digital age. So if you don't mind, expound a little bit more on this slide, and then I'll move on to our next question.
Yeah, as you look at this slide, it's fascinating because this is election systems around the globe, and those who are using a Dominion and Smartmatic. What's fascinating is the Michigan Economic Development Group uh, really should be known as the Amway DeVos Van Andel Group because they're the major contributors to it. But it's very fascinating that Konakek will hold their meetings where? At the Amway Grand. What is that? Konakek was a Chinese data system that was pulling information regarding voter registration and things like that from all around the globe and stealing their information and selling it. And so this group, if you look at Dominion, you look at their whole aspect, Mike Lindell was just proven right, not only by the Dominion dropping their lawsuit against him, but you get into this, who is Chris Sununu? What is LHS Systems from the 80s and 90s that the Bush family was really involved in? And so you start to look at that and you start to go, wow. And why is Betsy DeVos so close with the Sununu family? Really trying to help him in terms of some of the stuff that he was doing. As we come back to this is the interesting part, is Betsy DeVos and the relationship with the Bush family. Um, Mike Pence, as we come to know, he blocked the quorum that day deliberately. And what do you know? He just happens to end up with Amway money in his pocket. But you look at this, he was the determining vote factor to put Betsy DeVos into office. And if you look at that, the DeVos and Van Andels, they had a strong relationship with Mike Pence for a long time. This picture goes back to President Trump pointing to Betsy DeVos. That day was the day that Mitt Romney and Betsy DeVos met with President Trump. And what do you know? He had to point to her for a lot of specific reasons. Very fascinating when you look across the spectrum in terms of what they are doing, in terms of symbolism, and being able to understand what they were doing from a group standpoint in terms of being able to look at their overall, I guess what you said, the backgrounds. What were these people doing to be able to support a Luciferian system? They're not only ungodly, these people literally in public are showing you that they worship Lucifer, and not only this griffin aspect. A griffin's symbology is a Rothschild lion with a Nazi right wing. And their first fruits of what they're doing is giving that to the sun god. And if you understand that, that all comes back to this ideology or religion that they'll call it. They won't even call it a religion, they call it a boys club, but it's bigger than that. That is this Freemason group that Gerald Ford was a part of. And so, anyways, very fascinating from their perspective. I even tell people my former upline, who was the president of the Amway IBO board, that told me to be quiet or else. This was them posing with Gerald Ford and really their relationship to take over things. And so, anyways, hopefully that makes some sense.
Well, it certainly ties together. I think that that shadow society construct with what is publicly visible. And what I find compelling with your information is you have shown how that, incubated and gestated inside of a private philanthropic situation that became a multinational conglomerate. And so that leads me actually to my last question for you, Mr. Ayers, and that's with respect to the replicatability or the duplicatability of the model. If this type of activity and this type of infestation has incubated and gestated and grown and baked and come to fruition in this private space, in this philanthropic space, in this business space over this last looks to be about a half century, maybe a little bit more than a half century, what is the likelihood that the same type of pattern or the same type of model can be found in other private philanthropy that would pass as so-called MLM in the mind and hearts of the American people?
Yeah, totally. I mean, when you start to look at this across the aspect, you know, you go back to, the business group, the Federal Trade Commission, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. These groups, they're appointed by, and actually on their website, which I'd found, they redesigned their website after I exposed it, but the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in the United States, their address, if you add the numbers together, it's 13. And those families, those people who were appointed on their website, it says you cannot be a part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce unless you are, by degree, a 33rd degree Freemason. And so these families, these bloodline families, as you start to understand it, they have backgrounds, they have relationships. It's not a hidden key to understand that Microsoft has a strong relationship with Bill Gates. Well, I tell people this all the time is Bill Gates, as we get into the COVIDcon topic, Bill Gates and these whole groups, we look across this whole industry. Amway had built in the medical industrial complex, really, if you look across the street from them, they actually built, in the pharmaceutical industry, what was called Graham Pharmaceutical. Graham Pharmaceutical in Grand Rapids was an official manufacturer of the COVIDcon shots. And so you start looking at these backgrounds, Bill Gates, you know, Dr. Collins, from Dr. Collins' standpoint, we talk about the father of COVIDcon being Dr. Fauci, but Obama actually recruited. So Dr. Collins is actually the head of what's called the Van Andel Institute. The Van Andel Institute is a North American class 4 bioweapons lab. Think about that. All these major corporations, these corporate heads from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce who talk about the pharmacia, pharmaceutical companies, they're all working in cahoots with Dr. Collins for years as he was the head of the Van Andel Institute, breaking down what? The DNA in human genome to control, this is a crazy topic, but to control your DNA, control mankind. And as these groups, every one of these people were involved. And the money, if you follow the money, that's not only the proof, but we got to get past this entire construct of corporate America and how many other countries, how many other businesses, that did they use to be able to, I guess what you're saying, MLM businesses. How many others? Let's look at these two states. My friend Juan says this all the time. Two most corrupt states in the United States today, Michigan and Utah. Isn't it interesting that those two states are the two controlling states of all the MLMs that are out there today? I think that's a pretty interesting topic in terms of what's happened with these businesses that have been used to basically covertly fund their operations for a lot of other things. And let alone, as you go back into this, what was Amway doing? Even on their own website, you could support and fund the Red Cross. In the Red Cross, you donate as you place an order for your excess energy drinks or your Nutrilite vitamins. Oh, by the way, Mexico just seized Amway's Nutrilite farm. I wonder why. So it's just very interesting. So, but you could actually donate to the Red Cross, and then that money goes into a hidden pocket or pool that they can go fund whatever other operations they wanted to. And they weren't good. If you look at UNICEF, UNICEF is a UN organization that supposed to be helping kids. It's based on my research. They're not helping kids.
Absolutely powerful and compelling. Mr. Ayers, your information is incredible each time we get together. Thank you very much for coming on again and painting this picture and piecing this web together for the audience. For folks out there that would like to connect with you, learn a little bit more about your work, perhaps support it, how can they reach out and get a hold of you?
Yeah, very simply, if someone wants to go to my website, they can see my website is at wewillstand.info. I've got our previous talk on there, which was interesting because it was number 55. If you look at that, 5 and 5, that's disclosure. I think a lot of things happen um, as they should, right on plan. But somebody can go to my website, wewillstand.info, and get some more information if they'd like. They can read all my legal filings there. They can read and see our last video, which is number 55. Go to your website from there. But yeah, that's where people can get more information.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you again for joining us. For the audience out there, if you'd like to learn a little bit more, you can navigate to wewillstand.info or see the links in the description box below this video. This is SG Anon. I'll be back with each and every one of you again soon on the Q News Patriot Rumble. God bless everyone. Stay safe today, and thanks. Bye-bye.